The huge mandate that Prime Minister Modi and the BJP have won is undoubtedly a thumbs up for the government between 2014 and 2019. But the new one faces some tough economic challenges. On India Development Debate, we will be focusing on the question of what next, what should be the priorities over the next many days. And joining us to discuss the agenda for Modi 2.0 today is former Secretary Government of India, a civil servant with decades of experience, Anil Swarup. Mr. Swarup, thank you for speaking with us here at ET Now. Let me start by asking you, very simply put, what should be the top priority of the government and should there be a focus on jobs? Now, on the issue of joblessness, there was a lot of talk of it before the elections, and this government's response was largely that the problem is not that big. Will that kind of an approach still work?
I think the first effort should be to accept existence of a problem. I think they would. Maybe just before elections, if such news is given, any government will try and play it down. But I think the fact of the matter is, irrespective of the debate behind that's going around with regard to the NSSO data, the ground reality is that there is a problem relating to unemployment. And without recognizing that problem, I think addressing it may be a bit difficult. But I see no reason why they would not be, even though they may not be an express admission, there would be an admission of the fact that employment is an issue and that needs to be addressed. And once that is done, I think there are sectors in which employment can actually be generated. So, for example, I think medium and small scale enterprises that employ a large number of people. I don't think large enterprises do that, but medium and small enterprises certainly do that. And I think the government will be well served if they can think in terms of revival of the medium and small scale enterprises, because that will lead to a lot of employment generation. This sector unfortunately got hit by the demonetization policy as well as GST. Now, GST is a tremendous initiative taken by the government. But as has happened in other parts of the world, I think GST does take time to stabilize. And now I think the next couple of years should be spent on stabilizing the operation of GST. Another problem that might arise is in terms of assessment of the GST returns that would have been filed. Here again, a lot of effort will need to be made to look into the operational aspects of GST, including the IT backbone, which also needs to stabilize. So a lot of work needs to be done there. I think the initiative has been phenomenal. GST has been doing reasonably well, but I think a lot of work still requires to be done on that front. So GST stabilization would also help reduce the fiscal deficit. As per the figures that are now becoming available, I think initially there has been some problem in terms of revenue collections, and that includes GST collections. So once the GST regime gets stabilized, I think the revenue collection will improve. The MSME will also benefit out of it. So these are areas which are interrelated and which will help ultimately employment as well.
Yeah, just a word on, the mandate that we've seen, and it's been called so many words: historic, huge, massive, tsunami, etc. But what does it signify? Does it mean that there are no issues in the economy? Now people are saying that economic issues don't matter to voters. What's your take on the mandate 2019?
All elections are marked by a lot of rhetoric, and we should take it with a pot full of salt. For a political purpose, a particular rhetoric is put in place, and I think that is over now. Now people will have to get down to business. Now issues relating to the economic welfare and the economy of the country will, I think, acquire prominent space in the discussions. During elections, yes, the issues that are highlighted, it happens in every election. And I'm not very surprised how it happened this time. But now I think the whole narrative will have to change in the context of the troubles that we have in the economy. As I said, some remarkable initiatives have been taken. The attempt to settle the bad loans through NCLT, I think that's a remarkable step. That again needs to be taken to its logical conclusion. So as I was coming, the third point that I mentioned was with regard to the monetary aspect. I think NPAs are a serious concern. It's one of the highest in the world right now as a percentage of GDP. So that will also need to be addressed. And I think, as I said, NCLT is an initiative in that direction. So a lot of bad debts, as are now indicated as bad debts, may not be all of it would be bad debts. It's by definition that they are given as bad debts. So once NCLT gets going, And when the resolution of stressed assets happens, I think money will start flowing in. So there a lot of work needs to be done on the fiscal front, on the monetary front, on the employment front. A lot of agenda on the platter right now.
No, and what about GST? You talked about GST earlier, and over the last few years, we've seen a tinkering with GST here and there. Do you think that this tinkering needs to continue, or a fresh relook at the system is required at this point?
You know, GST was a tough call. It had been debated for years together. And finally, the government did take a call and went ahead and implementation of GST. Now, if you look at the history of GST elsewhere in the world, GST hasn't happened so smoothly anywhere in the world. In fact, if you look at the political implications of GST, almost all the governments that brought in GST lost. Here is a government that has won after having brought in GST. And I'm sure people sitting in the finance ministry would look at the issues relating to GST, and probably in the next couple of years, a lot of emphasis will go into GST, because it will smoothen business, it will encourage honest functioning. So there are a lot of positives of GST. When you bring in such a major reform, there are bound to be certain initial glitches, which we did find in GST. And I'm sure that the team in the finance ministry will sit down and resolve the issues that relate to GST.
Another big one is the NPAs, and you spoke about how this is now a pretty big crisis. What do you think that the government can do to make sure that there is a quicker fix than what has been seen so far? This is a situation which you just can't wait and watch what happens anymore.
I think that's a very serious issue. The banks, despite infusion of huge amount of capital, the credit flow hasn't really happened. So the banking sector is one that faces major challenges, but we have to look behind what is going on in the banking sector. Look at the power sector. The stressed assets in the power sector are a lot, and they become stressed because discoms are stressed. I think if we go into the reason for these stressed assets, we should be able to find answers. Let me take one sector, and similar approach can be adopted for other sectors also. I am a bit familiar with the power sector, having handled coal. I would believe that the stressed assets of the power sector can be handled if the cause for their stress can be handled. Now, what is the cause? The cause is discoms. I think Uday was launched with a view to improving the state of affairs in discoms. Some states have done well, but we have a great example. We've been talking about Gujarat model in other spheres. I think the best model that we have from Gujarat is that in the power sector. There, the power sector, it was totally turned around, and discoms is profitable there. Now, I fail to understand, if something that has happened in India, in a particular state, why can't it happen in other states? And the reason that I come to is, I think that level of commitment and indulgence has to be there in other states. When I was Coal Secretary, I had suggested that why can't Rajasthan people sit down with Gujarat government, they are adjoining states, and understand from Gujarat on how did it happen in Gujarat. Similar action can be taken in Rajasthan. Similarly, Chhattisgarh seems to be doing better than MP. Now, why can't Chhattisgarh, which was a part of MP, sit with MP and work out a detailed plan as to what needs to be done, how it will be done, who will do it, by when it will be done? It will require a lot of detailing, as was done in Gujarat. Similar sort of detailing and close monitoring can actually turn around. Now, look at the impact that it will have. If the discoms turn around, there will be a greater demand of power. Discoms will be able to pay the GenCos, and when there is a greater demand, the PLF will go up. PLF goes up, the finances of the GenCos will improve. They improve, they will be able to pay the banks, and the NPAs, at least in that segment, will come out. You can replicate this sort of an example in another sector also. So the NPAs of the bank can be handled by going into the reason for those NPAs and attempt to address the causes of those NPAs. And this can easily be done. Look at the steel sector. Till about 3.5 years ago, steel sector was in a terrible shape in India. But the government did come up with a comprehensive approach. Of course, the international situation also improved a bit, but the steel sector is not so bad today as it was 3 years ago. So my take is that whether it's power sector or steel sector or cement sector, I think things can improve because they have improved in certain areas. All we have to do is to learn from those success stories like that of Gujarat and see how it can be replicated elsewhere. So NPAs themselves are not a problem. NPAs are caused by some other problem.
Okay, no, I get that point. But let me come to some of the marquee schemes of Modi 1.0 as we're now calling it, things like Digital India, smart cities, made in India, which started off with a lot of fanfare, but didn't really, go through with anything big at the end of it. Do you want to see Modi 2.0 or this next government following up on those, or should they now be abandoned and a fresh approach brought to the table?
All these ideas were brilliant ideas. But the problem in this country is, for an idea to fructify and sustain, it has to be politically acceptable, socially desirable, technologically feasible, financially viable, administratively doable, and judicially tenable. So it's easy to float an idea, but to make it work on the ground, it requires much greater hard work. So what is really required is to understand as to why Make in India did not travel the distance it was originally expected to travel. It can easily be done. When I was talking of MSME initially, I think that will fulfill the objectives of Make in India, because MSME exists in India, and for the consumer within the country. So if Make in India has to happen, it won't happen only through very large projects, large visible projects. The problem sometimes is that we get so taken away by glitz and glamour that the substantial issues that require to be addressed, they don't get addressed. I think the current government should go over and think over it as to what are the substantive issues that need to be addressed, whether with regard to smart city or Make in India or some other brilliant ideas that came through. I think someone has to sit down and think through of the cause of these ideas not traveling the distance they have. And they can take succor from the fact that there are certain other ideas which worked, to try and understand how they work. Say, take for example, Swachhata Abhiyan. I think this has worked brilliantly. Someone should study as to what exactly happened in Swachhata Abhiyan. Coal production increased phenomenally in 15-16 and 14-15. Now, how did it happen and why did it happen? I think these success stories will give clue to making other things happen on the ground. So what I would suggest is, there are phenomenal amount of success stories in the previous government. There are some other areas where probably the movement has not been as much as it should have. What really needs to be done is to understand the approach that succeeded on the ground and try and replicate that approach.
Yeah. Now, Mr. Swarup, you've worked in the Modi government before you retired, and quite closely. Now, Prime Minister Modi is known to depend on key bureaucrats. Do you think that that's a pattern that will continue into his second term, and should it also be balanced with bringing in outside talent, or does this work?
I would believe that the dependence on civil servants will continue, because I think a large number of civil servants, when I mentioned Swachhata Abhiyan or Ayushman Bharat or coal, all these were delivered by civil servants. So there's no harm in getting expertise from outside. But I think the dependence on civil servants who had phenomenal experience in the past would continue. The beauty is that the space given to the civil servants was such that they could operate where they could. And I think that support will continue to be required. And it was given in the past, and that support will continue. And if required, you can get expertise from outside. There's no harm. I wonder why is this debate about getting expertise from outside? I think you can get expertise from outside, but by and large, the delivery of the schemes of the government are done by the civil servants with the help of experts.
Okay, Mr. Swarup, two things to round off, two things that you want to see which are different in this new government, and two things from the last government that you don't want to see.
What I would like to see is to take the initiatives taken by the previous government to their logical conclusion. And I'll give the example of education sector. Some remarkable initiatives have been taken there. What really needs to be done is to take them to their logical conclusion. And I would believe that would happen, because education requires greater and longer indulgence for any change to come about on the ground, unlike other sectors where change can be visible immediately. So I would believe that there will be continuity, and I would also believe there would be a lot of introspection with regard to such segments where progress has not been in the context of what was expected of progress in those segments. You gave some examples, and they are very good examples where a lot of introspection needs to be done to understand why it didn't travel the distance it should have. And I'm sure, having understood that, they would be able to travel the distance for what that particular scheme was required to.
And two things that you do not want to see, which took place in the last government.
I would not want to see, civil servants in the manner in which selections were made for CBI. They were a spectacle for the public to see. I think such public servants should be avoided. Care should be taken to post civil servants like Parmeshwaran Iyer, like the officers you have, Dinesh Arora and Ayushman Bharat. These are brilliant officers. By picking such officers and giving them space, there is everyone to see how much work they have managed to do, how much distance they have managed to travel. I think what will be the key will be the nature of civil servant who get selected to head particular organizations, because ultimately they will determine the course of events.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Swarup, for speaking with us. Senior, very experienced bureaucrat, former bureaucrat, talking about what Modi 2.0 needs to do. And thank you for joining us on India Development Debate tonight. As we wrap the show this evening, I just want to leave you with these pictures from earlier today, before this current government was officially disbanded. It was a meeting of, Prime Minister Modi with his earlier cabinet and with key officials. How many of these faces will we see repeated in the next cabinet? Will some survive? Will there be new ones? Will there be some surprises? All of that is something we're going to be keeping an eye on. Keep watching ET Now.